Thank you for listening to Depictions Media Radio. Welcome to Policy and Rights, the show about government policy and human rights.
C'est avec une profonde tristesse qu'on a appris ce matin du décès de Ian Shugart, sénateur, fonctionnaire, homme extraordinaire. C'était quelqu'un plein d'intelligence, de brillance, mais aussi énormément de grâce et d'humanité, de compassion. Il a été un grand greffier à mon gouvernement, mais surtout un très bon ami et quelqu'un profondément dévoué au service et aux idéaux de ce pays. Toutes mes pensées sont avec ses nombreux amis et évidemment avec sa famille aussi. It is with tremendous sadness that we learned this morning of the passing of Ian Shugart, Senator, public servant extraordinaire, who was a man of deep integrity and grace and brilliance. His impact on the public service, his long career leading us as a country in so many different ways was extraordinary. As clerk to this government, he contributed so much. I obviously am thinking of all his friends, and of which he had so many, and of course his family through this difficult time.
Qu'est-ce que vous pensez du budget de l'an 1? Pouvez-vous expliquer la différence entre des pauses humanitaires et une trêve humanitaire, puis expliquer aussi pourquoi vous écartez un cessez-le-feu?
Des pauses humanitaires, c'est vraiment à trois buts. D'abord, de permettre de l'aide humanitaire de se rendre pour les gens de Gaza. C'est à permettre de sortir les otages. C'est inacceptable que Hamas continue à garder les otages. Et c'est aussi une opportunité de pouvoir sortir des civils, particulièrement les Canadiens et d'autres citoyens. Mais on reconnaît que l'Israël a le droit de se défendre, doit le faire en accordance avec le droit humanitaire, le droit international, et on continue de veiller là-dessus.
Ontario wants an emergency meeting called about Alberta's CPP plans. What's your message to provinces concerned about this possible withdrawal?
Well, I think I've heard from many provinces that are really concerned about the fact that the CPP has delivered solid pensions for millions of Canadians, and it's an expression of the fact that we're all in this together, and the idea that Alberta might not just make their own pensioners poorer by pulling out, but impact Canadians from coast to coast is not something that most Albertans would want, let alone most Canadians.
Et le budget de l'an 1, on parle de relations avec les provinces. Le budget de l'an 1, vous en pensez quoi?
Moi, mes relations sont avec le premier ministre du Québec, François Legault. Je ne veux pas commencer à débattre des essais du Parti québécois de garder une certaine pertinence.
C'est à cause de vous que ces affaires-là arrivent, parce que vous divisez le pays.
Y a-t-il quelque chose que Poliev va pas blâmer sur moi ces jours-ci? On commence à s'y habituer. Merci.
Wondering if I can get your reaction to the fact that visa processing has been resumed with India.
Well, I think it's a good sign. We don't think it should ever have been suspended in the first place. But there's some people that were trying to get back to their families in India that needed urgent processing, so I'm glad that's up and running, but make sure that hopefully it doesn't happen again.
Is this a sign of easing tensions?
I would take it for what it's worth. Our feeling is that the suspension should never have happened in the first place, so It's nice for the folks that were trying to get over to India that were sometimes taking a trip of a lifetime or just trying to get back there, that they'll hopefully have a little bit more of a normal process than what they've seen in the last couple of weeks.
Have you heard from people that are in that situation? What have they told you?
A lot of anxiety. A lot of people have been making plans. We do have a flow of people that go to and from India, so it has been, I think, an anxious time for them, and they're worried. And my job, above the role I have as immigration minister, is to make sure people are safe or feel safe in this country. And I think this really concerning diplomatic situation with India has created a lot of fear in a lot of communities. Yeah, thanks.
Do you think that India's decision to restart visa services is a sign of easing tensions?
Yes. Yeah.
And do you think it's a step forward, or is it as much of a progress as we're going to make right now?
Oh, I think there's more progress to be made. There's certainly some difficult dynamics going back and forth. I was made aware of a tweet by somebody identifying as a major in the Indian Army that was pretty nasty toward people in Canada, but that's maybe a lone wolf. Getting the visas open again, I mean, it's great for families, right? Families here on this side of the water want to go and visit their relatives, and that's a good thing. All right. Yeah. All right.
I spoke to a family that spent hundreds of thousands of dollars of their own money to both fly a relative overseas to get a new treatment for glioblastoma, and then more than $400,000 to get that treatment in Canada. What do you say to families that are spending such great sums out of pocket to get access to drugs that haven't been approved by Health Canada?
Well, I think, first of all, I have enormous sympathy for any family that is in a circumstance where their health is compromised and they're searching for solutions. I can't imagine what they're going through. I can't imagine how stressful that is. I think from a systems perspective here, one of the things that we've been really well served by is Health Canada is seen as one of the best agencies in the world in terms of ensuring both the safety and the efficacy of the drugs that are approved. And it's when you're in a desperate situation, you want that drug right away. Health Canada needs to ensure the rigor of its process is such that we don't make mistakes in the rush to find solutions. Now, by the same token, particularly when somebody is in a really compromised position where their life is at risk, we do have to think about that balancing of those risks. And that's something that I'm talking to the department about finding, well, I see your reaction, and my response is that that's a process of continual process improvement.
So that reaction is that I was not aware of that, and I just wondered, does that suggest that there is some sort of significant change coming?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, I'm just saying that that I'm enormously sympathetic to somebody who is in that incredibly difficult situation. And I'm also incredibly sympathetic to the need for Health Canada to maintain rigor in our processes and to make sure that the drugs that are approved that are safe. And there's always a constant state of process improvement and evaluation to make sure that we get that right. And I want to look at, particularly in instances where somebody's life is in a compromised position where they might die, that the controls that we have on risk might be in a different place if somebody's life is already in a compromised position where they may have no other option to survive than to try something that is unusual and has higher associated risks.
Would that mean in some cases harmonizing our standards with the EU or the FDA?
Well, I think that we always want to look at how we cooperate with other jurisdictions and eliminate duplication. We also understand that other jurisdictions might make different decisions. They may more lean on supporting the market and economic considerations instead of safety considerations. And as you can imagine, if we get it wrong, if we end up approving something that we shouldn't approve, and it ends up being used by Canadians and there's an injurious impact and we failed to protect Canadians, it won't matter that another jurisdiction also got it wrong. People are going to fairly ask the question why we got it wrong. So we have to maintain that rigor in our process, but looking at what other jurisdictions are doing, building on their science rather than being duplicative is certainly something that we need to continue doing. Thanks so much.
Listen, can I get your thought on the idea of a humanitarian pause? I assume you think that's a good idea?
Well, look, we've called for humanitarian corridors to bring humanitarian assistance into Gaza. We've called for humanitarian corridors to get foreign nationals out of Gaza. So certainly we support the idea of humanitarian aid. And certainly at some point, a pause might be a good idea, but not until all of the hostages are released. Hamas has it within their power to release all the hostages today. If they really cared about the state of the Palestinian people, they would release those hostages and make sure that humanitarian aid flows quickly.
One of the implicit things in this call by the states, by your party for a pause is it's really going to be one party here that's pausing. Do you have any expectations? Do you have any expectations that Hamas would honor a pause?
Well, our call, you're correct in pointing out, calls for a pause by all. I don't see how we could possibly trust Hamas, which is a designated terrorist organization, designated by the government of Canada over 20 years ago, to abide by anything like that. Thank you.
La différence entre un cessez-le-feu et une trêve humanitaire, à quelles conditions?
Moi, j'ai toujours aux conditions que le Hamas rentre les armes.
Donc une trêve à condition que le Hamas rentre les armes.
C'est un groupe terroriste. Je ne pense pas qu'on négocie avec un groupe terroriste. Le Canada ne l'a jamais fait, puis il ne faut pas commencer à le faire. Moi, je pense que si on négocie avec eux un cessez-le-feu, dans un an, ça va être à reprendre. Puis l'histoire nous montre que ces gens-là ne lâcheront jamais.
Mais au-delà d'un cessez-le-feu, une pause humanitaire pour permettre aux
moi, je pense qu'il faut avoir des courtes trêves pour sortir les Canadiens de là. Je pense que c'est une possibilité, mais je serais très, très prudent. Je partage là-dessus l'avis du gouvernement actuel qu'il faut que la Hamas rende les armes. Il n'y a pas d'autre façon de gérer ce groupe-là.
C'est réaliste?
Posez-leur la question.
Allez-vous vous présenter à l'élection?
Je ne sais pas encore.
Okay.
Je ne sais pas. Je suis en train d'analyser mes énergies pour savoir si... Non, une chose certaine, c'est que il va y avoir beaucoup de travail à faire pour les victimes de criminels. Depuis 8 ans, il ne s'est rien fait là-dessus, vous le savez. On a adopté une charte des droits des victimes en 2015 et cette charte-là n'a pas du tout progressé. Je dirais au contraire. Dans beaucoup de cas, les médias ont livré de l'information qui disait que cette charte-là n'était pas respectée. Donc, je veux rester près de la politique d'une façon ou d'une autre pour faire progresser, rebâtir ce qui était débâti. Est-ce que ça va être à l'intérieur du parti? Est-ce que ça va être à l'intérieur d'une machine administrative? Je ne sais pas, mais chose certaine, il y a beaucoup de travail à faire, puis je ne serais pas loin d'Ottawa.
Vous seriez plus capable de faire avancer votre point en tant que député que vous l'avez été en tant que sénateur?
75 ans, député, c'est une job. Faire une campagne électorale à 75 ans, c'est une job. J'ai fait une campagne avec ma conjointe en 2019. J'ai posé 400 pancartes. J'ai fait toutes sortes d'activités. Donc, je calcule là, ma réserve d'énergie actuelle, si elle permettrait d'avoir une campagne.
Ma question, c'était plus, vous dites qu'il y a encore des choses à faire. Ma question, c'est qu'est-ce que vous pourriez faire de plus en tant que député que vous n'avez pas pu faire en tant que sénateur? C'est un peu la même chose.
Refaire ce qui s'est été défait. Tous les projets de loi qu'on a adoptés, qui ont été défaits par Justin Trudeau, il y a beaucoup de travail à faire à la maison.
Donc vous, ça vous intéresse si vous êtes au pouvoir?
Bien, j'ai déposé des projets de loi, le S-205, la charte pour la violence conjugale. Est-ce qu'il va être adopté par le Parlement? Je ne sais pas. S'il ne l'est pas, il va falloir le reprendre. J'ai déposé récemment au Sénat une charte pour améliorer la charte des droits des victimes. Il ne sera sans doute pas adopté avant la prochaine élection. S'il ne l'est pas, il va falloir que quelqu'un prenne ce flambeau-là. Donc, il faut voir. Puis être sénateur, ça te donne une liberté que tu as moins comme député aussi. Bien, député, il faut que tu sers d'abord tes citoyens. Et la cause vient après. Tu es élu par des gens pour servir des gens. Et la cause de victime passe après le service à la population. Donc, c'est de voir, si tu es député, est-ce que tu as une réserve de temps pour faire cette mission-là? C'est tout ça que je réfléchis.
Ça serait où vous vous présenteriez?
Au Québec.
OK, dans laquelle des 75?
Non, il y a des régions que je connais très, très bien. Vous le savez, la Montérégie, je connais très bien pour avoir été directeur en environnement. Je connais bien l'Estrie, je connais bien la Beauce. Je connais très, très bien le Québec. Je serais à l'aise un peu partout au Québec. Même l'Abitibi, où je suis originaire, je serais à l'aise partout.
OK. Donc, il n'y a pas de choix encore de fait.
Pas de choix encore.
Ou vous ne voulez pas nous le dire?
Il y a des préférences, mais le choix n'est pas fait.
OK. Merci.
Allez, bonne journée à vous.
Yes, of course, the government does. This is something that we think is very important. we recognize that there is a very dire humanitarian situation in Gaza at this moment. We've been calling for a humanitarian corridor from the beginning. We recognize that aid trucks need to get through and they need to be able to deliver this assistance. And so this is why yesterday the Prime Minister, in alignment with the U.S. and the United Nations, did call for a humanitarian pause.
And on that final should that be conditional on hostages being released?
Well, first of all, getting the hostages out is one of our top priorities.
So should a humanitarian pause be conditional on Hamas?
Well, we very much will continue to negotiate for the release of hostages. However, we also recognize that there are a lot of people in Gaza right now who need humanitarian assistance, and so I don't think we need to make this one or the other. I think we need to ensure that we continue very strongly to push for the release of the hostages. There are Canadians there as well, but we also understand that we need to get humanitarian assistance to Gazans. Bon, c'est une pause militaire, c'est quelque chose qui est important pour nous. Nous voyons qu'il y a des milliers de personnes en Gaza innocentes qui ont besoin de l'assistance humanitaire. Alors c'est quelque chose que le Canada, avec les États-Unis et l'ONU, est en train de voir comment est-ce qu'on pourrait le faire. Ce qui concerne les otages, c'est notre priorité. Il y a des Canadiens qui sont peut-être qui sont là aussi, et on va continuer de travailler avec tous nos alliés pour justement sécuriser que tous les otages soient retournés.
C'est quoi la différence entre What is your reaction to the UN Secretary General saying there are clear violations of international humanitarian law going on right now in Gaza? What is your reaction?
Look, I'm not going to comment on that because I'm not an expert in international humanitarian law. What I can say is what Canada has been calling for from the beginning, which is to ensure a humanitarian corridor, and what we're asking for now is looking at what possibility there might be for a humanitarian pause so that aid can get through.
Canada join. Could you explain a little bit of the difference to Canadians who aren't entirely clear what the difference is between humanitarian pauses and a ceasefire?
And I think the Global Affairs has actually made a very good effort to make that explanation. We are very concerned about the humanitarian situation that exists in Gaza, and we believe and support the idea of a humanitarian pause, which is basically a pause of hostilities to allow humanitarian aid to get into the region to help those people who need the help so desperately.
But you said yesterday that
Hamas is a threat that must be eliminated. Do you still is your government's position that bombing should continue until there is no Hamas left?
No, what I was saying is I was concerned about the terrorist threat that persists. And that terrorist threat has to be dealt with, but that's a very different situation than making sure that the people who are in a desperate situation, innocent civilians on both sides of that border, we have to make sure that the humanitarian aid is available to them. We do everything possible to protect them.
You also said yesterday that Hamas cannot be trusted to abide by any kind of ceasefire or international law. Why would they abide by a humanitarian truce?
Humanitarian pause, what we're talking about. And it's basically a pause in hostilities to allow humanitarian aid to get to the people who desperately need it.
What is your reaction to the UN Secretary General saying there are clear violations of international humanitarian law happening in Gaza?
There are, I think, important bodies that have that responsibility to examine exactly what's taking place. Our expectation always, and from the very first day...
Do you agree with the UN Secretary General? Does this government agree with that?
What I agree with is that there is international law and humanitarian law that applies to any battlefield situation, and that every country has an obligation to abide by the rules, the international rules that exist. And there are appropriate bodies to determine if and when there are issues around that. But I believe very strongly that law should be available.
If Israel pauses, but Hamas does not, how does that actually...
You're asking me to speculate on something, and frankly, we believe that it's important to be able to get humanitarian aid to those people who desperately need it. And we support.
But can that happen if Hamas doesn't pause?
We support that there should be a pause. How that would actually be effective is to be determined, but we believe that it's important that aid get to the people who desperately need it.
Thank you, everybody. Our job as MPs is to reassure them and to keep them safe. But we're, as any responsible country, planning for eventualities, and it's something that it really, in terms of a live situation that's evolving, is something that we'll keep our minds and hearts open to.
C'est quoi la différence, M. Miller, entre une pause, un cessez-le-feu et une trêve?
Je pense qu'il ne faut pas entretenir l'hypocrisie en demandant trêve à une organisation terroriste.
Yesterday, the UN Secretary General said that there were clear violations of international humanitarian law happening in Gaza, and I'd like to understand Canada's position on this. Do you agree with the Secretary General on that?
So I understand what the Secretary General observed, and I think what I'd just say is that Canada has taken the position since the outset of this conflict about Israel having a right to defend itself, but always in accordance with international humanitarian law. I think there's been concerns about the loss of innocent lives on both sides of the border. Obviously on the Israeli side, that's what prompted this entire engagement by Hamas's terrorist act. And Israel's response, we understand a response was coming, a military response, but ensuring that international humanitarian law is observed is critical for any nation, particularly a democratic ally.
Israel does contend that they are respecting international humanitarian law, that there are sufficient supplies still, and that that international law on armed conflict and humanitarian law allows them to conduct themselves the way they are. Is that your view?
So I'll just observe what we've seen so far, which is that, we've had humanitarian aid going in, which is good. It started on the weekend. That's a very positive step in the right direction. But calling for humanitarian pauses is also really, really critical to ensure the flow of that aid continues.
And is it contingent on hostages getting out, or civilians getting out, or foreign nationals getting out?
That's the last question.
Yeah, I think the important piece about the hostages is that hostages absolutely have to be returned.
What
right?
about the civilians and foreign nationals? Like Canada's support for this idea of humanitarian pauses, is that contingent or conditional on not just aid getting in, but civilians getting out?
I think the best people to ask about the nature of the humanitarian pauses would be the Prime Minister or Minister Joly, but what I'd say to
Neither
you
is available to speak to us today.
What I'd say to you is that in terms of sort of the return of hostages, that is critical. The flow of humanitarian aid is also critical. That's something that Canada has believed in for a long time. You've seen us dedicate $60 million in humanitarian aid. I think that puts us at or near the top of all of the allies that are involved in this situation.
But I don't hear you saying civilians getting out, sir, and Canadians included.
16 points behind the Conservatives. I know that you and a lot of other Liberals have had harsh words against Bishop Poilievre specifically, but clearly that message isn't necessarily resonating with Canadians who seem to support him more and more. So are you concerned about that, and what do you guys have to do to reverse that trend possibly?
Well, I think what Mr. Poilievre does is try to amplify people's anger. He tries to reflect back to them their anxieties. And we are in a world right now that is incredibly challenging. And I think once the dawn begins to break on the very difficult time that's happening across the globe, there's going to be an opportunity for people to see who is pushing people down, who is pushing into their anxieties, who is trying to make them more worried and more scared, who is trying to take advantage of their anxiety, and who is actually trying to fix their problems and lift them up. I'm very confident about how we'll do in the future as the dawn breaks and people see what exactly he's been up to.
What happens if that future doesn't happen for the next election?
Well, first of all, I've been around since 2004. You see the ebbs and flows. I'm extremely confident of where the folks who are trying to fix problems and lift people up will be in history, and where the people who are pushing into people's pain and trying to make them feel worse and trying to make them more scared about their current condition are going to be. Humanity, well, I'll say this. Well, I think that, look, humanity is going through one of the most difficult times in its history. Every time we think that we can't deal with something worse seems to happen on the planet right now. People are feeling really weak. This is not the first time humanity has gone through this. And in these moments when the world is going through things that are very difficult, there are people who try to reassure people, try to find solutions and try to lift them up. Mr. Poilievre has offered no solutions. The only thing he's offered is an amplification of people's anxiety, an opportunity to press into their fears, to make them more scared and more worried about the moment that they're in. I think that will not be, in the long run, a good strategy, one that will reward him electorally.
And when do you guys start considering that you might have to change your strategy if that doesn't change?
Every day.
Okay.
I mean, I think that we're in a world where if somebody tells you that they know what's going to happen in 6 months from now, they're lying to you. Next week. We're in a state of constant change. So we have to be constantly changing. So, I mean, there's an evaluation of what we need to do. to serve Canadians. I mean, I look at the area that I'm in within health. It's under constant change. There's huge opportunities for transformation. So, I'm trying to highlight what is positive, show people that there's tremendous things that are under the surface that are coming. And I know today is hard, but it's going to require patience. And, yes, it's easy to reflect people's fear back at them. And it's a little like having sugar. It feels good for a second, but after a little while you realize that it's false and not really all that good for you, nutritionally bacon. And I think those are the policies of Mr. Pollard.
Marc, Minister Blair yesterday said Hamas is a threat that must be eliminated. Does that mean that the position of the government is that bombing should continue until there are literally no Hamas members left?
Well, I think that it's extremely important that the people who are responsible for the terrorist attack are brought to justice. But I think it's equally important that civilian life be protected. Right now, we've asked for a humanitarian pause, for an opportunity to bring in aid and to be able to remove people. I have constituents that are trapped in Gaza right now. We have a profound concern for innocent life. I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive. I think bringing Hamas to justice and making sure that they are held to account for their actions and that we can work to wipe them out as a terrorist organization and the protection of innocent life are not incompatible concepts.
But once the pause is over, I mean, it's bombs and not lack of food that's killing people in Gaza, right? So once the pause is over, does the government favor a resumption of bombing until Hamas is declared eliminated by Israel?
Well, my personal position is, and I think that the minister has spoken clearly on this, is that we have to find, wherever possible, opportunities to peacefully resolve this, while at the same time bringing the folks that are responsible to justice. It is an incredibly delicate situation. Minister Joly was just in the region trying to talk through that path, find a way to make sure that life is protected and that those that are responsible for terrorism are brought to justice.
Do you feel that your government and other governments,
I apologize.
has your government and other governments done enough to force Israel towards a two-state solution?
I think that, right now we need to focus on a humanitarian pause. We need to focus on the immediate crisis that's in front of us. I don't disagree that we as a world need to reflect upon how we get through not only this immediate moment, but how we get to broader peace. We can't allow the violence that we've seen over the last while to become something that continues, obviously. So I think in all of our hearts, every person everywhere in the world wants peace, and that has to be at the heart of our work and our thinking in terms of solutions. But I have to go. I apologize.
Qu'est-ce que vous comprenez de la différence? Entre des pauses humanitaires et un cessez-le-feu. Parce qu'il y a plein de gens qui ne comprennent pas ce que ça veut dire, ce gouvernement. Qu'est-ce que c'est la différence?
Une trêve, c'est pour s'assurer que les civils, qui sont malheureusement toujours les victimes les plus importantes des conflits, puissent avoir l'aide dont ils ont besoin. On sait à quel point c'est difficile à Gaza. Manque d'eau, manque d'électricité, manque de carburant. Ce sont des choses, des biens essentiels dont les gens ont besoin pour survivre et passer à travers l'épreuve qu'ils vivent présentement.
OK. Donc, mais pourquoi est-ce que vous n'avez pas jusqu'à un cessez-le-feu? Qu'est-ce que c'est la différence? Parce que entre les pauses humanitaires que vous demandez et un cessez-le-feu, concrètement, qu'est-ce que ça change?
Mais en même temps qu'une trêve permettrait de protéger les civils, le peuple israélien a le droit de pouvoir se défendre des attaques de Hamas, qui est un groupe terroriste. Donc c'est une obligation d'ailleurs du droit international qu'un peuple qui est attaqué puisse se défendre contre des attaques comme celles qu'on a vues le 7 octobre. Donc c'est une obligation qui amène le gouvernement israélien à pouvoir faire en sorte que le Hamas ne soit plus une menace pour le peuple israélien, mais la trêve est là pour s'assurer que les civils en Palestine, dans la bande de Gaza, puissent se protéger des conséquences de ces actions.
Ça implique des négociations avec le Hamas, non? Parce que si on négocie les pauses humanitaires, on négocie avec le Hamas. Parce que hier, M. Blair a dit on ne veut pas négocier avec Hamas, c'est ça le problème.
Donc on travaille avec la société civile palestinienne dans la bande de Gaza pour s'assurer que les organisations internationales qui sont encore là puissent avoir les biens dont ils ont besoin pour protéger les gens.
Monsieur Duclos, que pensez-vous sur les solutions pour votre parti, maintenant qu'on voit que vous êtes 16 points derrière les conservateurs selon un nouveau sondage ce matin? Pour vous, comment est-ce que vous pouvez faire pour rattraper et combler ce gouffre-là?
Bien, tout d'abord, il faut, reconnaître le fait que les Canadiens vivent une situation très difficile et quand ça va mal, bien, il est légitime que l'on blâme les gouvernements qui sont là pour prendre soin des gens. Donc, c'est la première chose que je dirais. La deuxième chose, c'est que le gouvernement canadien, étant conscient de ses difficultés, doit faire encore davantage. On a fait beaucoup au cours des dernières années. L'allocation canadienne pour les enfants, par exemple, diminue dans ma circonscription à chaque mois de 40 % les familles en situation de pauvreté. Les aînés, même chose, le taux de pauvreté des aînés était réduit de presque 25 %. Le logement, on investit beaucoup par la stratégie nationale du logement, mais il faut en faire encore davantage parce qu'avec l'inflation, les problèmes qu'on voit sur la planète, la crise climatique qui crée toutes sortes de dommages, il faut en faire encore plus. Mais les gens ont besoin d'en demander encore davantage.
Ça fait quand même un certain temps que vous dites qu'il faut en faire plus, vous, je dis le gouvernement, là, pas vous précisément, et pourtant les chiffres ne font que continuer dans la même direction, une chute des libéraux. Est-ce que ça vous inquiète?
Bien, ça nous dit qu'il faut faire un bon travail. Nous, on pense que l'alternative au gouvernement libéral, celle de M. Pierre Poilievre, qui est de couper, de faire mal à nos familles, de faire mal à nos communautés, c'est une alternative qui serait très mauvaise pour les Canadiens. Mais il va y avoir un moment où les Canadiens vont devoir se prononcer sur cette alternative. Et nous, on pense que l'option d'investir dans les gens, dans les familles, c'est la bonne.
C'est suffisant, ça prend un cessez-le-feu.
Bien, ce qui est important, c'est qu'on puisse apporter l'aide nécessaire pour les civils présentement qui sont coincés en Palestine puis qui vivent dans des conditions qui sont très difficiles. Donc, c'est important que cette aide humanitaire-là puisse parvenir. Je pense qu'on a été clair sur la question de la pause pour
Given that Canada supported it, like what does that look like?
And Canada is calling for humanitarian pauses, and this is something that several other countries have called for. And how that will actually work, I can't tell you. What I know is that a ceasefire would leave Israel vulnerable. And so a pause will allow them to maintain readiness, but also ensure that aid will be delivered. And that's our goal. We put in $60 million towards humanitarian aid. Now we need to get that aid into Gaza, and we have to find a way.
What's the difference between a truce, a ceasefire, and a pause? What confidence do you have that Hamas would respect the humanitarian pause?
I have no confidence that Hamas will respect anything. What we need to do is negotiate and find a way to help make this happen.
What's the difference between a truce, a pause, and a ceasefire?
I'm not a technical expert on this, but what I would understand is that when we have a war, we have guns being fired. When we have a ceasefire, we have guns laid down. When we have a humanitarian pause, we have guns poised but not firing. That would be the way I would.
But what does it negotiate with Hamas?
In Gaza, which everyone is concerned about, is a very good approach. Thank you.
Do you have a second answer?
Well, the idea, I certainly do, because I think we should be very much concerned about civilians, both in Israel and in the occupation.
But do you think a humanitarian truce is right now a better call than a ceasefire?
Well, we have to make sure that the international community is supportive, absolutely.
Do you believe that Hamas should be eliminated? Do you believe that the government should take that position?
Well, I don't think there's a single person who can say anything nice about Hamas, but that very definition of eliminating, I'm not quite sure how that can be accomplished. And that's what I think the international community should focus on.
And on a humanitarian pause,
can you just sense for people at home between humanitarian pauses and a ceasefire?
So what is the difference from what I've heard from my constituents?
From what you heard from your party, because your party is not asking, Mr. Trudeau is not asking for a ceasefire. He's saying we want humanitarian pauses. What does that mean concretely? What's the difference?
The government has been very clear all along that we support Israel's right to defend itself, but the government has been very clear that civilian life must be protected in Gaza. There's different approaches about whether or not it's a temporary ceasefire, whether or not there's a long-term ceasefire. The government has not got into that question. The key message that the government is supporting is that we need to make sure that civilian life in Gaza is protected. I'm proud of the fact that the government is focused on that we're working with partners around the world. People can get caught in, including journalists.
How can it get protected without a ceasefire?
Well, at the end of the day, the actual military operation that Israel is providing in Gaza is actually very targeted towards Hamas. I can appreciate that it's a small area, it's difficult. I mean, look, Laurence, I'm not going to get... Look, at the end of the day, I support where the government position is. This is a very nuanced issue, one of the most complex geopolitical issues in the world.
And at the end of the day, the government is walking the line between making sure that Israel has its right to defend itself of the worst attack since the Holocaust, but at the same time trying to make sure that the response from Israel is proportionate to Hamas, a terrorist-based organization, not on civilian life. It's a difficult question to answer. I have to get to caucus. Thank you.
Le gouvernement, M. Trudeau a dit oui, on va demander des pauses humanitaires. Le S est important. Quelle différence faites-vous entre une trêve, une pause, un cessez-le-feu et être content de la position qui se prend?
Je pense qu'il faut faire des pauses, des trêves, tout ça, c'est tout des synonymes. Je pense que pour le bien de toutes ces personnes, c'est des êtres humains dont on parle ici, il faut absolument que ça arrive. Puis moi, je pense que tout ça, il faut vraiment que ça se fasse au regard du droit international. Je pense qu'on parle d'êtres humains ici, qu'on parle de pause, qu'on parle de trêve, c'est des synonymes. Je pense que pour le bien des êtres humains, peu importe où ils sont,
mais pourquoi le premier ministre fait cette distinction entre la vie
alors? C'est on arrête toute la violence. Une pause, ça veut dire on arrête le temps de donner de l'aide pour l'Afrique.
Répétez-moi ça.
Si on fait un cessez-le-feu, ça veut dire que tout le monde arrête de se battre. Si on fait une pause pour une trêve humanitaire, ça veut dire que tout le monde arrête de se battre pour une petite période de temps, de quoi qu'on envoie l'aide. Je
suis pas dans la stratégie internationale. Non, c'est un début de quelque chose qui pourrait devenir suffisant. Je pense que dans la tension internationale qu'on a tout de suite, il faut commencer par quelque chose qui va mener à ça. Donc c'est peut-être... Moi, personnellement, je suis pour aucune guerre nulle part, puis un cessez-le-feu permanent partout. Mais de toute façon, il faut que l'on respecte le droit international, peu importe où on se trouve, peu importe où il y a des conflits sur la planète, puis pas moins, comme c'est le cas au Moyen-Orient tout de suite. Le droit... Hey, je suis en retard, vous savez, là.
Non, vous êtes tout en retard.
7 minutes en retard, là.
Est-ce que les pauses, c'était une façon de rallier tout le caucus derrière cette idée-là?
Non, il n'y a aucune stratégie de caucus là-dedans. Non, pas du tout. Non, je pense... Non, je sais pas si le caucus est divisé, c'est parce qu'on parle de toujours de la même chose, mais de différents angles. Donc, que ce soit une pause, que ce soit un cessez-le-feu, je pense qu'une pause, c'est un début d'aller vers le cessez-le-feu, n'est-ce pas? Si on parle d'une pause... Donc, j'espère, j'ose croire, et je souhaite hardiment qu'on va finir par avoir un cessez-le-feu et que les pays occidentaux, dont nous sommes, arriveront à trouver une solution entre eux pour pouvoir faire cesser ce calvaire que vit le Moyen-Orient depuis trop d'années. Oui. We need experts in that field, lawyers in that field that should tell us if it's what's respected, if there's some rules that are not respected. I don't have a clue. Right now, I'm not an expert in that field, but we're a state of law here, and international law is law. So any parties should respect international law, and all the Western countries should be severe about that, to condemning whoever on this planet. This conflict is important because it's sexual right now, but there's many conflicts anyway. International law should be respected by everyone, and Western countries should make sure it's the case.
Thank you.
Moi, je suis au Nouveau-Brunswick, j'aime bien ma province.
Mais est-ce que vous
voyez les Québécois débattre de ça?
Oui, mais pensez-vous que c'est le Québec les pires? Là? Vous avez vécu le gouvernement X en Alberta, en Ontario. Trouvez-vous qu'il allait un peu loin, un fort café?
Je pense qu'il faudrait que je relise l'article. Mais disons que je suis au Nouveau-Brunswick, moi. Je suis bien content de la façon que le Nouveau-Brunswick a évolué dans les droits linguistiques, mais c'est jamais suffisant. Et on a fait des gains, beaucoup de gains juridiques, mais maintenant, il faut porter le juridique aux pratiques sur le terrain. C'est là qu'il y a ça accroche souvent dans les provinces, comme le Nouveau-Brunswick. Pour ce qui est des commentaires de M. Graham, je les ai pas lus, je ne peux pas les commenter. Mais dire que le Québec est l'un des pires acteurs au Canada, c'est ce que vous me dites, là. Je me fie à ce que vous me dites. S'il a dit ça, je ne suis pas tout à fait d'accord avec lui. Vraiment.
Merci.
I just wanted to ask your thoughts on this idea of a humanitarian pause. Is that something that you support?
I think all of the Western nations, Canada, the United States, and the UK have used the same language. We're not calling for a ceasefire. We understand that Israel has to be able to defend itself under international law and has to be able to take out a terrorist group, Hamas, that's at its borders. But certainly we want humanitarian aid to get in, and pause simply means you put your weapons, on pause for a little bit while that happens, and I think that's a reasonable step.
On the Senate, sir, do you have any words on the Senate, sir?
Let me make it clear. When you see something impossible, like the ceasefire, you have to take some possible step in order to make the impossible possible. So I strongly support the humanitarian pause, bringing food, water, medicine to the citizen, bring the temperature down. Probably with this, with the future, we will reach a ceasefire. And after that, the mission of the entire nations is to bring both sides to a negotiation table for a lasting peace and security. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Can you give us an update on what's going on in the negotiations for the St. Lawrence Seaway?
We expect the parties to get back to the table by Friday. I'm going to talk to my mediation team as to where I should be then. I follow their recommendation. I'll show both these things. They got a 96% track record, even with the BC port strike, so, you know, where I can be helpful.
Is Friday soon enough?
That's when the party said that they wanted to do it, so, you know, it is in their hands. You know, I mediate and conciliate. I'm responsible for that. They have to come to the agreement.
So if nothing happens on Friday, is this the time you start looking at the Canada Labour Code, start pulling into that policy toolkit?
Not going to go there yet, because even mentioning that kind of taints what the table will be. I go into it eyes wide open, but optimistic.
There's no threat to Canada's reputation as a partner here. Are you concerned about Canada's reputation as a trading partner?
Well, we just keep talking to our American counterparts. They are obviously very concerned and have a lot at stake here, as do a lot of members of this caucus around Great Lakes communities, and with a particular interest in grain. So getting it from all sides, and I apply that pressure to the parties.
You were online talking about the Conservatives and their bill, or the bill that's being voted on today on vaccine mandates. What do you think about the fact that we're still discussing this in a post-pandemic period?
Oh man, we just got so many other things to be discussing right now, but you know, I can't tell them what to do. I just find it it's a reflection of their priorities, so I'll let that speak for itself. We got a lot of other things we need to be talking about right now.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Oui. Demande que le gouvernement intervienne. Quels outils vous avez pour intervenir, pour forcer un retour à la table, pour forcer un règlement?
Ben, je dirais le ministre O'Regan est évidemment très, très saisi de ce dossier-là. C'est un dossier important non seulement pour les armateurs, mais je pense pour l'ensemble des Québécois et Québécoises, même le pays entier, parce qu'on parle de... Ben écoutez, moi j'ai parlé avec le ministre O'Regan hier. Le ministre O'Regan parle avec les partis parce que c'est un enjeu important, je l'ai dit, avec tout ce qu'on vit présentement, l'inflation, beaucoup d'incertitudes. La dernière chose qu'on a besoin, c'est une perturbation des chaînes d'approvisionnement. Donc, évidemment, c'est quelque chose qu'on suit très, très près. Puis on veut que les partis retournent à la table de négociation pour arriver à un accord.
Imposer un médiateur, imposer...
Écoutez, toutes les solutions sont envisagées. Comme je vous dis, le ministre O'Regan est très saisi de cette question-là parce que il va de l'importance nationale. C'est un enjeu économique pour l'ensemble du pays. Et je peux vous dire que c'est tous les acteurs de la chaîne d'approvisionnement sont concernés, interpellés dans ce dossier-là. Je peux vous dire, j'ai parlé à plusieurs et les gens expriment cette préoccupation-là. On a déjà vécu ça dans le port de Vancouver. Évidemment, on ne veut pas que cette situation-là se répète. Et vraiment, j'en appelle à l'ensemble des partis de s'asseoir parce que, comme je vous dis, les enjeux, on a réussi après la pandémie à rétablir les chaînes d'approvisionnement. Il va aussi de la confiance de nos clients à travers le monde. Donc, la question de logistique est fort importante.
Est-ce que ça doit être réglé avant votre relâche parlementaire?
Écoutez, il faut que ça soit réglé le plus rapidement possible. C'est pour ça qu'on en appelle aux partis de s'asseoir puis de trouver une solution négociée.
Une loi spéciale pour forcer un retour au travail.
Le ministre O'Regan, comme je vous dis, est saisi de cette question-là. C'est une question importante. Et vraiment, j'en appelle à tous ceux qui sont à la table de négociation. Asseyez-vous parce que vraiment, c'est non seulement dans l'intérêt des deux partis, mais c'est aussi dans l'intérêt des différents acteurs à l'échelle du pays.
C'est pas d'échéance, une ligne.
Le ministre O'Regan pourrait vous répondre là-dessus.
You're talking about the increase in cost. Yeah, we're still at level.
Well, I would say everyone in the country feels the level of urgency. Like I said, when we came out of COVID, the resiliency of our supply chain was paramount. You know, we have inflation. We need to make sure that we're not creating a situation that would be detrimental to different actors in the supply chain. You know, there's a lot of issues around trust that our international partners are putting in terms of the logistics that we offer in Canada. But I know the party understand that. I trust them to come to a negotiated agreement. That's what we want, and I hope that they will be meeting and continuing to find solutions.
Minister Blair says that Hamas should be eliminated.
I could not understand.
Minister Blair says Hamas should be eliminated. Do you agree?
I'll leave that to Minister Blair if that is his comment. Merci.
There was a British MP who was traveling to Canada with the Parliamentary Committee last week. He had the first name Mohammed. He was stopped twice for additional security screening and said he was humiliated by it. What's your reaction?
Well,
when we heard that, we called Air Canada. Air Canada apologized, and apologizing was the right thing to do.
Je sais que c'est votre dossier, mais la haine en ligne, le projet de loi, vous avez beaucoup travaillé là-dessus. Vous aviez dit que ça allait venir à l'automne. Là, l'automne est presque fini. Quand est-ce que vous pensez que ça va venir?
Il faut demander à la ministre actuelle, mais c'est définitivement une priorité du gouvernement parce qu'il y a trop de choses inacceptables en ligne.
Pour la voie maritime du Saint-Laurent, les armateurs demandent une intervention du gouvernement. Avez-vous l'intention de le faire et faire quoi?
Ce qui est clair, c'est l'importance de la voie maritime. On est en contact avec les deux côtés. Ce qu'il faut, c'est retourner à la table et ce qu'ils vont faire. Parce que la solution, ça se négocie autour d'une table.
Oui, mais ça se négocie autour d'une table.
Ça se négocie autour d'une table.
Qu'est-ce que c'est la différence entre des pauses humanitaires et une trêve humanitaire? Votre gouvernement fait la distinction entre ça.
C'est-à-dire, vous voulez dire une pause?
India has said that it will renew issuing of 4 kinds of visas. Do you feel that that chapter is now closed? Are you satisfied with what they said about that?
Well, it's good to see that they have resumed that. It would have been nice that they didn't take it in the first place. And as I want to remind Canadians and everybody that there was a Canadian that's killed on Canadian soil, and we've been asking for greater cooperation with the investigation.
How do you interpret the signal of this slight easing of tensions from India? Are they trying to send...
We have very strong people-to-people ties, right? And to making sure that both Canadians and Indians can have the ability to be able to go back and forth, especially when it comes to celebratory events like weddings, and sadly when it comes to funerals. Those are two very important events that we want to make sure that people can go back and forth. So it is good news for Canadians as well.
When are there going to be arrests in that case?
As you know, when it comes to the police, they decide independently.
You have no information as to how much longer they need?
As a former police officer, I can assure you that this type of, when it comes to police investigation, they are completely independent.
On this one, there's no way the government has no clue what's going on the RCMP
their investigation is completely independent.
But you're going to have to react to it politically if there are arrests. Are you concerned that this could all start up again if there are?
Again, the police will make their decision when whatever information does come out at that time. Of course, we'll make the appropriate judgment calls at that time.
So it could go on for years then?
It all depends on the police investigation.
I can't say whether it's within months, within weeks.
I can assure you, I have no idea to be able to say whether it's going to be months, weeks, or years. But one thing I can say, I do have confidence in their ability to do a good and thorough investigation. Thank you.
Ils se plaignent, ils ne sont pas capables de joindre au téléphone, ils ne sont pas capables, excuse-moi. Pas de problème. Merci. Ils ne sont pas capables de rejoindre Canada Vie au téléphone, qui ne sont pas capables d'avoir des remboursements. Il y a encore des problèmes. Qu'est-ce que vous dites à ces fonctionnaires?
Premièrement, le temps d'attente au centre d'appel sont inacceptables. J'ai parlé avec le leadership de Canada Vie, j'ai dit ça, et il travaille fort sur cette question, mais je sais que 99% de fonctionnaires déjà enregistrés avec Canada Vie, mais bien sûr, le temps d'attente au centre d'appel sont inacceptables. Tout le monde doit accéder leur avantage.
On est en train de créer un nouveau Phoenix, là, ça va pas bien du tout.
C'est pas le cas. Nous travaillons fort sur la question, sur les enjeux. Nous avons appris les leçons de Phoenix, bien sûr. J'étais la ministre d'approvisionnement, je sais les problèmes là. J'ai parlé avec mes collègues, surtout le ministre Duclos, et nous savons qu'il y a le travail à faire, mais le leadership de Canada Vie va continuer de s'assurer que tout le monde peut accéder les avantages nécessaires.
Quels sont vos moyens pour forcer Canada Vie à améliorer leur service? Est-ce que vous pouvez les punir?
J'ai parlé, comme j'ai dit, depuis être nommé comme ministre du Conseil du Trésor. J'ai parlé avec le leadership de Canada Vie. J'ai dit que c'est inacceptable d'avoir ces temps de temps au centre d'appel. Ils savent qu'il y a un problème. Ils travaillent sur le problème et je vais continuer de surveiller le progrès et sinon nous allons avoir d'autres conversations et mesures. Merci à vous.
say that's discussing the vaccine, at least the opposition is at this point, this far after the pandemic.
Look, I mean, I think the opposition is out of touch on this. I mean, Canadians overwhelmingly supported COVID vaccines. I think it's also concerning because when Mr. Poilievre first put this forward, it was about eliminating all vaccine mandates. You know, I can't send my son to daycare if he's not fully immunized, and that's something that's about the public health of all Canadians. I think most Canadians recognize how difficult a time that was and how, important and safe vaccines were. This is, I think, just riling up people at a time when, we need to be focused on other things.
Comment interprétez-vous l'appui de M. Poilievre assez fort à ce projet de loi?
Moi, je crois que c'est très concernant. On sait que les vaccins sont sûrs, on sait qu'ils sauvent les vies, on sait qu'ils ont des impacts importants. C'est un moment que je crois que c'est hors de ce que les Canadiens se préoccupent à ce moment. Le fait qu'il le revient, je crois qu'il veut faire... certaines personnes se sont divisées, mais nous sommes dans une autre époque et je veux confirmer que la position du gouvernement, c'est que les vaccins sont saufs, ils sont importants, ils sauvent les vies. Moi, comme mère, je ne peux pas envoyer mon enfant à soit la garderie, soit l'école sans qu'il est immunisé. Et c'est important parce qu'il y a des diseases, des maladies qui sont très contagieuses, qui sont dangereux et les vaccins ont sauvé des vies pour des dizaines d'années et c'est quelque chose qui est important. Does Canada support Israel in its call for Antonio Guterres to step down?
Look, what Canada supports right now is very much looking for a humanitarian corridor, looking for humanitarian pause to get aid into Gaza. We've been firm and we support Israel's right to defend itself within international humanitarian law, and that's our position. Thank you.
Mr. Poilievre coming to Windsor, coming to have a rally in Windsor?
I'm not too concerned about it, no. Look, I would expect any leader of any official opposition to get around the country. There's a big difference in my riding in particular, because I've had many conversations over the 4 years. There's a strong history of progressive conservatism, but when I talk to most conservative-minded individuals, they are concerned about his trajectory in terms of what he represents, because it's a different type of conservatism than what we've generally seen in the country. And people don't forget that when the merger happened with the Progressive Conservatives and what is now the CPC, that party is dead.
Is it mostly in Hants, like the more rural where you come from, or is it mostly in Kings, the Valley?
No, I would say Atlantic Canada writ large. I mean, look, right now you have Premier Houston, who ran a campaign in 2021 saying that he was not the same as the federal Conservatives. Because he knows the body politic in Nova Scotia is different than the type of style that Pierre Poilievre is offering. We have an obligation to remind Canadians about what he stands for and how he has acted up here in Ottawa and certainly across the country. The misogynistic tags on his videos, his American-style politism, the way, even in Kelowna, the way he acted in terms of how he engaged with journalists. So there's a lot there. Not to say that I disagree. There's some areas, certainly on trying to drive regulatory reform, big projects, fine. But I think at the end of the day, when I talk to my constituents, they want to see a principled advocate in Ottawa. I'm making sure I try to do that every day. And at the same time, their style of conservatism that exists in Atlantic Canada is different than what the federal Conservative Party has become over time. Thank you.
This show has been produced by Depictions Media. Please contact us at depictions.media for more information.